according to the one mind of Jesus Christ. So what Paul says, what unifies all of us is that we have committed to think, reason, and act with the mind of Christ. Nothing else. Just the mind of Christ guides everything we do. Next, by using this Christ-patterned moral reasoning, we empty ourselves of power and status, like Jesus did, to put ourselves in the service of other people. That's the heart and soul of Paul's teaching in his churches. Third, discernment, which is what we're going to talk mostly about today. Discernment is about determining how we embody Christ in every context of daily life. Everything we do and say ought to be a reflection of how we understand Christ and his life. So that bar is pretty darn high. But that's where Paul, that's where he is trying to shape his congregation. If you see me, there is the sun reflecting off this car windshield, and it's like I need sunglasses. So here's the thing I want to add that's not in this review that Garrett touched on this morning. It's really important to understand that from the start of his life to his death, Paul remained Jewish. He didn't change anything. He interpreted the resurrection of Jesus as being an invitation to Gentiles to become part of Judaism by committing to follow Jesus. And so, as a good Jew, Paul's principle, as a Pharisee, his principal role is teaching people how to live a holy life in daily life. That's what Pharisees did. They taught people how to live holiness in daily life. Paul continues with that after his encounter with the risen Jesus. So what that means is he's bringing Gentiles into Judaism, but what he's saying is it's not for you about following the Torah, the Jewish law. It's about shaping your life to conform to the life of Jesus. So Jesus is everything for Paul. And the law is still good. The Torah is still good. It's good for all sorts of things in there make for good actions, faithful actions. But what matters most is, does what you do and what you think align with the mind and the ministry of Jesus? So that's what he's doing. That's what we're talking about, is how do we live the life of Jesus in a 21st century world. So let me stop there. Any questions about that? Because I've added that, and you're not going to have a chance to ask me about that because it's not on the sheet unless we do it right now.
So
yes.
I have a question. I haven't heard the sermon yet, but how does that fit with the dispute between Paul and Peter?
How does that fit with the dispute between Paul and Peter? It's very clear. Peter and James and John and those original disciples of Jesus, they remained committed to the Torah as interpreted by Jesus, their rabbi. Paul's doing something different. He's ministering mainly to Gentiles. And so that's the difference. And that's why Peter and the whole church in Jerusalem, Paul's caught in the middle. He's got the church in Jerusalem that's still Jewish and Torah observant, pushing against him from that direction. And he's got the Roman Empire pushing against him from this direction, because he's taking Gentiles and telling them, Jesus and God are our Lord, not Caesar.
So the dispute is not about the Torah, it's about Gentiles.
The dispute is not about Torah, but Gentiles. The dispute is about Torah, whether Torah is the law for Gentiles. So it's both. And Paul's saying, no, it's not exclusive. It's still worthy of consideration, but it's not a rule. We're about to get to this. It's not a rule-based life. It's about imagination of living Jesus. And I'll get to that in just a second. Yes?
Paul internalized what the Old Testament was working for.
Paul internalized what the Old Testament is working for. I would say he internalized the community to be what? Oh, well, Jesus is alive in him. That's not part of Judaism. Well, no.
Well, it was and it wasn't.
It wasn't. Resurrection was not unknown to some Jews, for sure. Great. Okay. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to skip over the words that matter because I'm going to talk about them in the context of the readings. You can come back to that, and if we have time, we will come back to it. But I want to jump ahead to this whole idea of what is discernment as we can see it in Paul's letters, and what's central to that practice we see here in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. So I'm going to walk you through this because this is the heart, really, it summarizes in a succinct way the heart of what discernment is all about. And I'm going to do it slowly and piece by piece. And if you have a question about the piece we're on, shoot up your hand or shoot out your voice. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Let's stop right there. Who or what is the foundation of that? Well, who's he referring to? Jesus. And the word living is really critical. I mean, Jesus sacrificed his life in ministry ultimately and in death. Paul's saying, in your daily life, I want you to embody Christ's sacrifice in a living way. This is not about dying. It's about metaphorical dying, but it's about living in a sacrificial way for other people. All right? That's point number one. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God. Everything Paul is about is acting in Christ-like ways that are pleasing to God. Because what Paul is saying is, if God is pleased with the way I embody Christ in ministry, God is going to let that life-giving power that God has flow through me to enrich the people I'm serving. So let me say that again. What's well-pleasing to God is what ends up gracing the community of people who receive ministry. We talked last time, I think, about, is it a mattress ministry y'all have? Or, yeah, mattress ministry. Bed ministry. So you are offering yourselves as a living sacrifice. You're making a sacrifice by providing beds to people. What's happening is, because that's pleasing to God, the people receiving the beds, their lives are enriched. They got something they didn't have before. So, pleasing to God benefits the people receiving the beds. You see, it's really simple. It's simple, but we're not really trained to be thinking and looking at things the way that Paul's presenting them. Because what that allows us to see is the glory of God happening in the world. And for Paul, this word glory, Greek word is doxa. The glory of God is where God visits the earth. And when God visits the earth, good things happen. Life happens. So the people receiving the beds have their lives lifted up, because God is pleased with your action and sacrifice of getting beds to them. All right, stop right there before I move on to the next part of this. Questions or comments? Simple, but I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's simple to understand. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have a question or a comment. Yes, please. Sorry, I can't. Let me come over. Yep, go ahead.
I say the key, I believe, is we have to see ourselves as a supply, and that's establishing love. So when we see ourselves as a supply from heaven, I think the spirit of service will be more natural and organic, and we can be more creative and engage our community.
So you're saying we should understand ourselves as be a supply from heaven to the earth. Absolutely. Great way to say it. You know, I should have stapled this together. Thank you. All right, let's move on. So offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your reasoned worship. And there's the Greek word I put in there, logikein. What does that sound like in English? Logic, exactly. This is logical worship. It's reasoned because they've just done what I walked through with you. I acted in ministry by taking a bed to people who needed a bed. And I see that God is pleased because these people are really excited and overwhelmed with getting a bed. That's using Christ-like reasoning. It's really very simple. Everybody make that connection? All right? Now, this is not the first and last time I'm going to refer to this wonderful drawing. This might be an imaginative depiction of an early church gathering. What I want you to begin to think about is, in what we're talking about, these people will have, they've had a meal. I don't see where the kitchen is, but they will have already had a meal. And they're now after the meal. And a part of what's happening in this after meal gathering is they're talking about this kind of thing right now, where one of them saw another one of them, or some of you saw some of the rest of you taking beds to people, and the people's lives being lit up from these new beds. They're talking about this and affirming one another in this practice. And they're pointing out, I see God working through what you're doing. So just keep that in mind. We'll come back to that. Verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world. What Paul's saying is, in Christ, God has opened the door to what Paul calls a new creation. And in the new creation, all the norms and the values and the standards and the practices of the world have been subverted, so that now the new creation is structured and guided by the life and ministry of Jesus. That's the new creation. So as we're sitting here together talking about how to live Jesus in our daily lives, it's really critical, Paul says, do not bring those values of the world to this conversation. We only bring to this conversation the life and ministry of Jesus. Okay, let me stop there, because that's another crucial dimension of Paul's perspective. Anybody want to comment or have a question about that? Might be the hardest thing we're talking about in this practice, because every one of us has been shaped by the world. And so in some ways, we are subverting that. Yes,
I
Julie?
was thinking about the culture of success, of capitalism, of getting ahead in the world. Those all being things that don't matter in this context. That would be
That's
the
what
things-
Paul would say.
Yeah, those would be the
Yep.
things to set aside, at least in this conversation.
Yes, he says, or he's, in his prayer, he hears Jesus saying to him, my power is working in weakness. Weakness being the characterization of somebody who's a servant to other people and crucified. But the power of God has worked in that Jesus is raised from the dead, and that's a power greater than any power on earth. So yes, that's absolutely right. This is about understanding that Jesus sets the norm. We as followers of Jesus are going to say, that's real power and strength. The world is going to say that's pretty much weakness because you're not focused on success and pushing and ambition, bumping people out of the way, or worse yet, bullying people out of the way so that you succeed. That's the world's way of defining success. In the new creation, we define success by you looking like Jesus and practicing his ministry. Other comments or questions? I'm going to say it again, easy to understand, very hard to live this way. But that's also why we're a community, but we'll get to that. We support and encourage one another in this hard work that's easy to understand. I know that sounds ironic, but it's hard work, but it's easy to understand what we're about. So do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it's really interesting. These verses are written all in the plural you, y'all. You'll see that in a minute. It's written to y'all, but there's only singular mind. And this is my little quiz here toward the end. Why is mind singular talking to y'all, a group? Somebody be bold. I don't grade papers. But. Mind of Christ. Mind of Christ. Thank you. One mind for a group. One mind for a collective. Now, the word transformed. The word transformed, the Greek word is metamorphosis. Caterpillar to butterfly. This verb only shows up 4 times in the entire New Testament. It happens twice in Paul, once here and once in another place. Well, we'll get to it at the end. You're seeing both uses in Paul. And the only other 2 uses are in 2 of the Gospels. And it won't surprise you to know that it's at the transfiguration of Jesus on the mountain. And this word transfiguration, that's the translation of the same metamorphosis. Jesus is in some way metamorphosed on the mountaintop. And so the word is transfigured, but it's the same Greek word. So we are transformed by the renewing of our mind. We begin to see the world, respond to the world, and act in the world in a radically different way because we now live by the mind of Christ, not the mind or the spirit of the world. All right, questions, comments? I know I'm going through this really slow, but this is pretty important. Yes?
In the context of the versus renewal, like a one-time thing, or?
Oh, is it a one-time renewal or an ongoing renewal? It is. Well, I would say rather than an annual re-up, it's a constant process underway. And if we went back to Philippians in chapter 1, Paul says, I'm confident that what God has begun among you, God will bring it to completion by the time Jesus returns. A process underway. And in that process, it's easy to say we take steps forward and sometimes steps backwards. Thank you for that. That's a good question. Anything else before I keep moving? All right. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that y'all may prove through testing what is the will of God, what is good and well-pleasing and mature. Now, this verb dokimazo, proof through testing. I think in the Bible, in the New Revised Standard Version Bible, they translate that dokimazo as discern. But it's actually a word from Paul's scientific world. A geologist would take a rock and break it open in testing to actually see what's in the core of the rock. So to know the constituent parts of a rock, you have to break it open. You have to prove through testing what's in the rock. And so what he's saying is several things here. First of all, he's saying that you have to prove through testing what is the will of God. And this may be the hardest thing we talk about today, although I've already said that once, but that was then, this is now. Proving through testing the will of God is trial and error practice. And let me say what I mean by that. For Paul, every situation is a new situation. And so Christ's ministry in this moment, in this setting, I may have some ideas about what's worked in the past, but this is a new situation. So I can work from my practical wisdom that I've learned over time. I can act according to that, but I have to be humble enough to understand that in this situation, with this person or with these people, it may or may not bear fruit. So you can see this. I want you to really process what I'm saying, because there are a lot of people that are confident that they go into a situation and they know they're going to be right about what they do. And they're going to do it, and it's not going to come out the way they expected. Where are they going to point the finger? At the recipient. Here's an image I use all the time. As a teacher, I may think I'm the greatest teacher in the world, but nobody comes to my classes. I can take that as in one of two ways. One is the people in my class are a bunch of bozos and don't have a clue how to hear things. Or I might understand, I'm used to teaching in Episcopal churches. I can't even remember if I've ever taught in I'm not going to call you all Baptist. Your hymnal says Baptist, but I know you're not. I know you don't have that in your name. So what might work in an Episcopal church might not work with you. I didn't know that till I got here. It turns out we're only about that far apart. But you see what I'm saying? I can come here and do what I usually do, but it may not be what's best for you. I have to prove through testing whether what I have to say and how I say it actually brings you life. And I have to be open to understanding that, it may be after I get finished here, the feedback is, don't ever bring that guy back. I understand that, but that's how it works. Paul is saying you prove through testing what is the will of God. And then notice the next thing he says, what is good and well-pleasing and mature. Everything I do in teaching has to be oriented toward hopefully being pleasing to God and beneficial to you. And if it's not, then I need feedback for what got in the way. Rather than saying what got in the way were 50 or 60 people who didn't understand, which I know is foolish. Everybody following what I'm saying? Now, let's poke and prod that. Because there are plenty of people who know the rules. And the rules always apply in certain situations. And what I'm telling you is, Paul says, there are rules, but they don't apply in all situations. They might apply in this situation, but they might not. For instance, when he's writing to the Romans, and as I understand y'all are going to talk about Romans maybe starting next week. In Romans, you've got two groups of Jesus followers. One is a group of really Torah-observant, strictly Jewish followers of Jesus. And the other group is a Gentile group. They can't seem to come together because they can't agree on what food to serve at the meal. Do you have to serve kosher food only? Or can you eat ham and bacon and all the other things? They won't come together because of that. And Paul's saying, each of you may think those are the rules for you, but the bigger rule is what brings you together as brothers and sisters as followers of Jesus. So what you think is a rigid rule is not a rigid rule in this context. Those rigid rules are dividing people that shouldn't be divided. All right, let me stop there because I've unloaded a lot and it may be hard for you to hear or bear. So questions, comments, fears, stones. Yes?
You say prove through testing, but our whole maturity as Christians is repetitive because we slide backwards in our actions. So we may prove it multiple times.
Ah, perfect. We may prove it multiple times. We may prove two things. One, some of my actions are really pleasing to God and bear fruit, and some of my actions bring chaos and destruction. That's why reflecting on the consequences of actions is a key part of this practice. I think I hear the flavor of your question. Am I hearing it correctly?
As long as it's repetitive.
It's repetitive. And it's repetitive for this reason because Paul's view goes all the way back to Aristotle. And that is that this kind of reflection on actions and consequences over time builds what Aristotle and others and Paul call practical wisdom. It's practical wisdom learned over time by reflecting on your lived experience in the world. So the more I do something that bears fruit, the more I begin to get convinced that this is a good thing. But I've always got to have the humility to realize, but this group or this person, this context might be different. But that's what I have to take into consideration. Let me get you to jump down to the bottom of the page because I think this is a great segue. I'm going to show you two more places where Paul uses this verb, prove through testing. And let me just say to you, he uses this maybe a dozen times in his letters. This is a key word, a key concept. But look down at Philippians chapter 1. This is my prayer, that your love may overflow. And let's just remember, love is Christ-like acts of self-giving for others. That's the embodiment of love. My prayer is that your love may overflow with knowledge and full insight to help you prove through testing what really matters. over time you prove through testing the things that really matter to you. So I've got a question there that I'll get to in a second. Let's look at the next passage at the top of page 2. Same word, same concept, different permutation. Do not despise the words of prophets, but prove everything through testing. Hold fast to what's good and distance yourself from every form of evil. And the word often gets translated, don't carry out any evil or something like that. But it's broader than that. The word is, don't do anything evil, but sometimes you're around evil. Or you're around people that you know seem to have the capacity to always bring chaos to you. Anybody know any person like that in your life? Paul's saying, prove through testing who those people are and keep a distance. If person X is somebody who always provokes you to anger and you can't seem to control your anger around that person, Paul's saying, keep a distance. Come on, prove through testing that you don't need to be that close to that person. I mean, it's just real practical stuff. But it's really the nuts and bolts of what he's saying. And he says this almost in every letter. If we had all afternoon, I'd show you where this shows up in every single letter. And this verb, this Greek verb, dokimazo, it gets translated differently every time it shows up. And so you never get the continuity of what Paul's doing because the English translations are different in every situation. And that's unfortunate because you miss the critical nature of reflecting on my actions, your actions, and their consequences. And we do this together. That's why in Romans 12, Paul says, y'all prove through testing. You do this work together. This is part of the work that this group right here is doing in the early church. After a meal, they're having this kind of conversation, among other things. Here they're singing and there's music, but they're also having this kind of conversation. So here's a question on the top of page 2. In your own individual and community practice of proof through testing, what actions make a real difference in the quality of your community life? What have you all proven through testing here in this setting? What are the things that really matter? Well, I know you have opinions about this.
Worship.
Worship.
Actually, I think as well, what you prioritize community and being connected. Everything else goes out there. You got to first love, you got to celebrate, prioritize relationship, and connect.
Exactly.
So your preferences are all your individual approach.
The community comes first. Your relationships here come first. That makes a real difference. Now, to go further, do you see how the idea that this community is what's important and maintaining your relationships is what's crucial? Do you see how that differs from the ways of the world? The ways of the world are about you individually making up your own identity and your own mind about what success is and pursuing that. Cost what it will with family and friends and others. That's the distinction Paul's making. So yes, that absolutely. You've proven that through testing. But that's what this is all about. Okay, we're good. I'm going to keep, yes. Sure.
I was going to push back on that a little bit because I feel like in the world, I'm in business, you can run your business, you can run your world in a Christ-like manner, and I think find success that way too. So I want to make that distinction between, the bad guys in business and, cheating people and doing things like that. that exists, sure. But I also want to make the distinction that, it does come, you can do it the right way as well, and success can come that way as well.
So here's what I would, you push back on me, no problem, I agree. I'm going to push back on you a little bit and say, I think you're redefining success. Because in your business, the way you just described it, success is modeling Christ in leadership and in practice. That's success. And that does bear fruit in your life and the lives of the people in your business.
We'll treat your customers like a community. Clients.
Absolutely. That's success. The world would say, well, I mean, you may argue with this, but most of the world would say it's all about profit. Financial profit. Because you could even say, well, I have profit in the relationships. That's what I mean by saying you're redefining success. So I agree with you in everything you're saying, but I want to make that distinction because I've seen businesses. I mean, as a lawyer, I've seen businesses for whom profitability is the goal, and the relationships can and sometimes suffer because of that. That's the worldly goal. That's the difference in success I'm talking about. Doesn't mean...
Small business versus corporate.
Well, that could be part of the problem. The bigger we get, I say, as an Episcopalian and Anglican worldwide, the bigger the church gets, the harder all this is. And so people in my church don't like hearing what I have to say. The higher up the hierarchy is, the more it doesn't work. All right, so let's, got two more things, and I know I got about 3 or 4 minutes, but we're good. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 14, because here is how Paul orders this conversation that I've been talking about. Pursue love and strive for the spiritual things, especially that you may prophesy. Those who prophesy speak to other people for their upbuilding and encouragement and consolation. Those who prophesy build up the deliberative assembly. You can see here where the gentleman who said we put community, the community's interest is foremost. You can see Paul is saying that exact thing. Building up this congregation is what all of us are committed to doing here. Now, what is prophecy? For Paul, prophecy is doing the very thing we've been talking about. It's helping one another see Christ at work in one another's lives. So I've used this bed example because it's one of the only ministries I've heard about. But I can see Christ reflected in the way you serve people in this bed ministry. So I can speak prophetically to you to build you up and to encourage you to keep doing this because obviously it's benefiting people's lives. And prophecy is one another sharing that with each other. But sometimes you might have to come to me or I might have to come to you and say, I think I don't see Christ coming alive in you in a particular way you're engaging with your friend or engaging with something else. In other words, sometimes critique is in order. That has to be part of this process. And we have to learn to become a community where we're accountable to one another and able to hear critique, not just give it. So it's both encouragement and what Paul calls consolation. Hopefully when I take a misstep, you'll be here to console me in that misstep and help me get back on the path. Why would you do that? Because you care for me like I care for you. And that's what builds up the whole community. This conversation, I'm jumping to the next passage from 1 Corinthians 14. This conversation in Paul's churches, so imagine, this is what I'm referring to. He's telling them how to have this conversation. What should be done then, my friends? When you come together, each one has a hymn. That's what's going on here. A hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others weigh what is said. Let me pause. Remember up in that Thessalonians passage, don't despise the words of prophets, but prove everything they say through testing. So here he's saying, let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the rest of you weigh what is said. If a revelation is made to someone sitting nearby, let the first person be silent, for you can all prophesy one by one. Everybody has a voice. Every voice counts. You can all prophesy one by one so that all may learn and be encouraged. Because God is a God not of disorder, but peace. So, this conversation is all about giving all of us encouragement and learning for how to live Jesus in our lives. It's simple, but hard work. All right, finally, the capstone is at the bottom of the page, and this is what Garrett was preaching on this morning. So this is Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. He's now reminding them of ultimately the goal of this practice that we've been talking about. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and he's saying the Lord is the risen Christ. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. And all of us with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Spirit, the Lord. What he's saying is that in this conversation that we're having, as we share with one another, seeing Christ at work, I share seeing Christ at work in you, and you share it with me. It's like seeing Christ reflected in a mirror. I see Christ reflected in how you're living. You see Christ reflected in how I'm living. And we learn from that because you live Christ differently than I do. But as we share that, we each see Christ being reflected as in a mirror. And what Paul's saying, and what he's really convinced of, is that we are being transformed into the image of Christ by sharing these things with one another. That is the practice of discernment. Yes?
Just looking at your definition of discernment here at the top of the page, it fits exactly what the liberationists call orthopraxis, instead of just orthodoxy, believing.
Yes.
Orthopraxis is a circular process of acting and then reflecting on the action and go back to reflect.
Just if some of you couldn't hear that, he's distinguishing in a way right practice from right belief. Not distinguishing them as inconsistent, but saying Paul is focused on right practice, right Christ-like practice. And the belief that's essential to that is Jesus is Lord. And so everything I do should reflect my Lord. But it's all about what is right practice, and that's what we've spent 4 Sundays talking about. Thank you for that.
When it says you can all prophesy, is all inclusive of women?
It's everyone. Absolutely. Yes, all men and women.
Because part of my baggage with Paul is, how do you have a theology that says in Christ there is no male or female, and then say women must keep quiet in the church?
So I'm going to answer, how can Paul say keep women quiet in church? Paul doesn't say that. The people writing in Paul's name later say that. That's another course. But I'm deeply serious. Paul has women leaders in his church. All you got to do is read Philippians and know that. Women are leaders in the churches. And so he's not telling any woman to stay silent. When you see that, that's not Paul's original voice. Now that's a historical interpretation, but I'm real clear. Otherwise, he's completely inconsistent, and I'm not willing to grant that. He's too smart for that. Thank you all. This has been a terrific time. I appreciate your openness. I know I've run over time, but barely. Yeah.